Yes.
And
And
share
share
screen.
screen.
Very good. Yes.
Yes.
Okay, share.
Share. Yeah. Yes.
Very good. Okay. Right now, where am I? Okay. I see you, Kunjun, but I don't see me. Am I?
On this one, right? Okay. Oh, you have to choose this one. ยังไม่เห็นจนตอนนั้นให้เห็นกล้องคุณเบนยังไงไม่ต้องเห็นหรอ So can use this one. I will pin you.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Good, and everyone can see my PowerPoints, right? Okay, very good. Well, welcome to our session today about resumes. And thank you for coming. First, a few thoughts about resumes before we get to the detailed advice. Some people may say, well, why do I need a resume? Either I'm a student and I'm not looking for a full-time job, or perhaps I already have a job, I'm not looking for something else, why do I need a resume? But the fact is, even if you like your job or you don't want to leave, someone else may need information about you and may ask for a resume. For example, if you're at an international conference or other event, you represent your university or your company, you make a presentation, people might just say, could you send us your resume? So they'll be able to introduce you at the occasion. Anytime you have sort of an interaction with the public, your resume is useful because it is a brief description of you. And so you do need a resume that is prepared and that is ready to go. And then you can update it as things happen to you in your life. Again, a resume is usually considered something that you use when you apply for jobs, but unless you're so famous that everybody knows who you are and you're an international celebrity and you know that you're on Wikipedia or something, chances are people would appreciate learning more about you, and that's where your resume comes into really being a very useful thing. Just to tell you all before we start, the Thammasat University, for all Thammasat community members, which is students, staff, and instructors, can send, if they wish to have some advice in terms of the English content, the English style of their resume, they can send it to us at the Thammasat University Library Abstract Editing Service, which is a free service, and get back the same text, any short text. It could be an abstract or a resume or any other short text, and they will get it back within 3 working days. Now, to find Thammasat University Library Abstract Editing Service, just do a search online for Thammasat Abstract, and there we are. And it's in Thai and in English. Here is the Thai version. And you go to the service page, you log in, you go to English Abstract, and then you put in your information and you upload the Word document, which might have your resume, or it might have other text, might have an abstract, and you take it from the desktop and you open, and then and that's it. So that's fairly simple. That's a free service, no cost. The other thing I was going to recommend, just while you're here, is the Read Kaben page, if you're interested in reading reviews of English language books. And you can do a search of Read Kaben. Here it is on Google. And the first thing you get is the Read Kaben. That has the contact information. That's my email address if you need to contact me, and if you need to contact the abstract editing service, as before, there is an email address for Kunjun somewhere here on our abstract editing page. But anyway, getting back to this is just to have contact information if you have further questions or need extra information. Now, and then the Thammasat blog, library blog with further information about the library's collections, new books. Here's the blog. And if you click my name, you will get lots of different blog entries in English about different subjects, often about open access books for free download, and that may be of interest. Now, one of the things I think before we go into the details about putting together a resume is your attitude about your resume, and why it pays to do a little extra effort to have the English in good condition for your resume. And that is because quite often people say, or will say, oh, my English, as if it's a personal problem with them. And I can understand why they feel it's a personal problem, but it really isn't. It's a national problem. And I will quickly point out this English Proficiency Index. It's called the English Proficiency Index, which is an annual study of how countries which are not native speakers of English, how they do in English studies. And alas, Thailand has had some problems. And in Asia, Thailand, here's Asia, in terms of the best in English is Singapore. A lot of them are former colonies of England, of course, of the United Kingdom. And then way below Vietnam, here's Thailand. So the good news is that in English, Thailand, we are better than Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan. So at least there's that. That's good news. But basically, when you send a resume, especially for an international job, and it might be a foreign company which is in Bangkok or in another part of Thailand, or it might be even for a job which is overseas, keep in mind that these studies are quite well known to employers and to other, and even to universities. And so when you send your resume, it really helps if you make a little bit of extra effort to pleasantly surprise the people who read your resume, so that even though this ranking has been published, they will say, oh, well, we should not discriminate against our Thai candidate just because of the results of these standardized tests. And by the way, I mentioned this testing not in any way to criticize the very hardworking people who devote their lives to educating our students in English language. That's not the point at all. It's just in terms of the appearances and how making sure that your resume appears correct and in a good ideal English is so very important. So I would suggest that for the resume, the first thing to remember as a general rule is Google search is your friend, especially for words that you're familiar with and that you think you absolutely know how to spell. For example, I've seen some people who graduate from Thammasat, but spell it Thammasat, A-R-T, instead of Thammasat, right? Now, the standard universally accepted spelling, if you do a Google search, right, they will tell you, you really mean Thammasat, don't you? Because almost everywhere you see it, Thammasat, the official Thammasat website spells Thammasat, not Thammasat. And people in Thailand obviously know that romanizations vary. We have sometimes a rich choice of different spellings of the same term. It's quite a familiar issue in Thailand. But in other countries, it's not the same, and they may be confused. For example, if they have never heard, I'm just saying in terms of another employer or perhaps another university that receives your resume, and they may never have heard of Thammasat University. So they may say, oh, Thammasat, is that the same as Thammasat? Is it the same university? Is it the same place? And they may search for Thammasat. And as we see here, even the Thammasat Book Center spells Thammasat as Thammasat. And let's see. So there are some incidences where people, I think there's some people who put, here's an Ajar, and I think who put her, who has a master's degree in accounting at Thammasat University. So there's a little ambiguity here. And so for that reason, when you prepare the content of your resume and you put in things like the name of the universities you studied at or other places where you worked at, Google search them, double check just to make sure that it's all very clear to someone else who will be looking at your resume. And I will just quickly say at this point, if you can have the exercise of the imagination to remember that someone will be looking at your resume, and if we can imagine who that person would be at a university or at a company perhaps, because when students apply for admission to a program or ask for a research grant, or when people apply to a job that has been advertised, hundreds of people send in a resume. Hundreds. And so the person who sits there in the office over there, who you don't know, but they have to sit and quietly open all the resumes now that they've been receiving and evaluate them somehow. So you have to think, well, how can I be polite and respectful to this person who is opening my resume, and what are they looking for? And I would suggest that they are looking for rather plain, rather simple, very direct and concise information in as short a form as possible that will contain all the very essential material. Now, I know that many of our students like to put in decorative things, you know, not just cats like you see here, but different colors and different items and all sorts of things, because they might consider it's a little boring, for example, to have these PowerPoints just black on white. But the reason that these PowerPoints are on black on white is because to make them easy to read. And so you may be surprised, I will be showing you some examples of recommended resumes or ideal resume formats. And to some students, that they may seem a little bit boring or a little bit undecorative. But the fact is, if your job is to sit all day and look at 500 different resumes, you're not looking for entertainment or pretty pictures. You really just want to get the information as quickly as possible and go on to the next resume. So if you just do a plain, rather simple, and even perhaps a little bit boring resume, you will in fact be much more polite and much more respectful to the person who receives the resume, because they will appreciate that you have given them the information as quickly and as clearly as possible. And if they have to figure out with different typefaces and fonts and all sorts of things what the information is that is in your resume, they may remember you because it was difficult for them to understand your resume, but they might not appreciate you to the full quality of your abilities. Now, how to design the resume? The very happy news is, well, the Thammasat libraries have books that are just about resumes. You can go to the Thammasat library catalog and do a quick search, the Tulip catalog, and here we are. And then do a quick search of resumes, and you'll see in the library catalog, we just have books about power resumes, and it goes on in many, many books. But even more interesting and quicker than that, because you wouldn't have to borrow a book, if you just do a quick search on Google for free Word resume templates. Templates is a very important word, which I'm sure you're familiar with. It means the sort of format within which all of your information goes. And so free Word resume templates, search, and there you are. Now, you want to get the one from Microsoft because you are doing this on a Word document. There's some others which are more like private companies, which are less interesting, because although they do offer you free templates, free samples of how your resume should look, then they might also try to sell you something. Of course, Microsoft also tries to sell you, but here is the website for the Microsoft. You see its office, you see the Microsoft logo, and they also have resumes which are premium, they call them, means you pay. But basically, the basic popular resumes and cover letters, let's just click on one. Open in browser. Whoops. Let's see if we can get, here we are. So basically, it saves you a lot of time because you don't have to organize your information and type out, you know, with the spacing and all that. This is done for you. So let's say Britney Spears is looking for a job. So she simply writes Britney, and then last name, Spears. And that's it, her address, her phone, her email, her LinkedIn, whatever, or Twitter blog. To replace this text with your own. And then you can quickly put in, I am looking for a challenging job in the field of nuclear physics, something, whatever your goal is. And then your experience, and you notice that this is all designed for you. You don't have to put in this in capitals, or you don't have to decide that. It's all done for you. Skills, activities, and it all fits in one page. And if you fill in this template, you will have a perfectly fine resume. And as you see, it's not a very long document. You want to give all the information they need in as concise a form as possible. And this is organized, neat, clean. You really can't do much better as a way to start with your resume. So Microsoft or just Microsoft Word, resume templates, search Google, or Microsoft Office templates, search Google. And they're free. And you can also get a template for the cover letter, which is to say the letter that you might put now in your email, for example, as to, or some applications for whether they be for university programs or for employment in offices, will ask for a formal cover letter, which is usually then attached to the application in Microsoft Word format. So you may actually have to do a cover letter, even though you send it all by email these days. Another approach is to simply Google best resumes. And again, you may or may not wish to, there are some companies which give you resumes and they want your money, but quite often it's best to look for the universities which offer advice to their students about resumes, or simply go to Google Images and look at the different ideas and suggestions. What is good, what is not good, that sort of thing. You don't want to waste a lot of time with all the different theories and approaches, but what the key point is here, and what we'll do a little bit of today in this class, is if we look at good resumes, we can get some ideas about what good resumes should look like. And we can imagine ourselves in the position of that happy person who is sitting in the office of a university or a company and opening 500 resumes and deciding, oh, this one looks much better, or that one maybe not so impressive, or where is the information in this one? I'm confused. Or why is this resume 20 pages long? People obviously are very interested in their own lives. Everyone is. But when resumes tend to be a page, 2 pages, for a very good reason, because the people who read them don't have much time. They don't have time available to really understand the full wonderfulness of you as a person and all the details of your life. So they want it all boiled down, as they say, in a very short form, and that's what they want. But it's a little bit like, if you think about it, on television, you probably noticed that some commercials of the TV commercials are longer than others. Some commercials are only 30 seconds. Sometimes they seem even less. Some commercials are a minute or more. But because it's very expensive, time is money. So it's very expensive to put a TV commercial and broadcast it to the world, to the nation. So if you spend a lot of money for 30 seconds for a TV commercial, and you say to the network or to the television station, oh, our product is so wonderful, what we're selling, we have 3 minutes we really have 3 minutes worth of essential material to say about this wonderful product. And the TV station will say to them, I'm sorry, but you only paid for 30 seconds. So however much wonderfulness is in your product, you must reduce it to 30 seconds because that is the format that is required here. And similarly, you are a wonderful product that you wish to present to all kinds of occasions and all sorts of purposes, not just applying for jobs, not just applying for university programs, higher education, but you need to introduce yourself at an international conference, or if you get a publication, you will be asked to send in a resume. So in all of these cases, you will be asked to use a resume, but the person who reads your resume will really appreciate it best if it is a short resume. So keep that in mind. Now, sometimes people ask, what's the difference between a resume and a CV? CV is another term that is often used. Resume, you notice it has no accents, although it is from a French word, résumé. resume, which means a summary. So a resume is a summary of your life, particularly your professional life, your working life. CV, which is another term, is short for the Latin words curriculum vitae, which means the course of my life, the way my life has gone. So, and sometimes people, instead of just saying curriculum vitae or CV, they say vita. Could you send us your vita? And that also means resume, CV. It's essentially the same thing. But people will, in English, in standard international English usage, in academic settings, but also in the business world, people may say to you, could you send us your resume? Do you have a CV available? Do you have a vita, not Evita like the musical comedy, but a vita. All right. Now, so yes, so they say the same thing. It's a 1 page, 2 pages, professional experience. Most important, contact information. Always be sure that's clear at the very top. And if you use those templates, you will have that information at the top. Because the key point is very frustrating for them. So yes, put in your education, put in your hobbies, your personal interests, but be sure that they can find you. Now, if you're a famous type and you published a lot of things or what have you, you may want to have a long version of your CV in case anyone cares about your full list of publications, and a short CV. And the fact is, the short CV that we've seen in those templates takes so little time to really do. It's a matter of minutes. You can put in what they ask you for. You may just wish to have 2 different CVs in case someone is really interested in the full story. But most people, a short resume or CV is enough. The other point I was going to mention is in terms of the boringness of black on white. Of course, that may not apply to students who are busy with the graphic arts, perhaps, or are just arts and design, or want to show their visual imagination. In those type of classes or university programs or jobs, if you're applying for a job as a graphic designer, indeed, you may wish to sort of really express yourself visually in your resume, in your CV or your vita. But for everyone else who is not a visual artist or a graphic designer, and you're just trying to entertain yourself and not be too bored, there you might reconsider and think, okay, is it really of the first importance? Is it very important that I put in the cats behind me or whatever your decoration is on your resume? And if it's not really, if the program you're applying to, if the job you're applying to is not about the visual imagery, then you might reconsider and just go as plain as possible. Now, putting your contact information, name, mailing address, city, country, zip code, and email address, which is a private email address usually. On a resume is expected a private email address, a cell phone number where you can always be reached or where someone can leave a message. Because again, if these very busy people who like your resume and they're interested in you and they want to contact you, but they try and then they can't, they may not try again. They're too busy. They'll try someone else who's available. So be sure that the information that you put on your resume means they will be able to contact you instantly. Of course, now with cell phones, things are a little more direct and simple. But in the old days, where even before there were too many answering machines, it was often difficult to be sure of getting back and hearing from a company that was applied to, people were somewhat frantic about that contact. Now, in Thailand, usually the resume has a photo, but this is not the case internationally. Many resumes do not have a photo. So in fact, unless you're asked for a photo, you might just want to leave the photo out. Because again, it's something that you see in the kingdom, resume, photo, but in many other countries, there are no photos in resumes. And indeed, if you look at the templates, you'll see some have a photo if you want, but most of them do not actually. They're just information. Now, again, in Thailand, we always see people call themselves Mr. or Miss or Mrs. Now, in our previous class, I went into some detail about this. I will speak very, very quickly about why, if you're sending a resume, particularly a resume in English to an international company, to an international university, to someone out there, even if they are located in Bangkok, if it's a job in Bangkok or anywhere in Thailand, actually, but if it's an international company, keep in mind that around 60 years ago, the rest of the world basically adopted the term Ms. MS dot, and no more Miss, no more Miss, even for little girls, really. That is not used. Mrs. is sometimes used for women who are married, of course, but in a professional, serious work or study situation, it is always Ms. It is always Ms. So if you wish to identify yourself at all by one of these terms, a title, as they call it, and you're a woman, it should be Ms. And that is very briefly, I won't repeat myself really at length, but if you are a woman applying for a job or applying for a university position, it is nobody's business whether you're married or not. It is not their problem or their business. Men who apply are Mr., and nobody knows or cares if they're married. Whereas women can often, it can work against women in all ways. Whether they're married or not married, people can put a bad interpretation on anything. And particularly people who are not feminist or people who are sexist and who are discriminating against women might say, oh, she's not married, maybe there's a problem. Or, oh, she's not married. If we hire her or we accept her in our program, she will leave the minute she gets married because she just wants to have children. Or they will say, if she is married, maybe she really just cares about her family and children and won't work as hard as someone who's not married. You know, they'll make anything up to explain why they don't want to hire the woman. Well, there's no reason to give them that information if they are going to be discriminating in that ridiculous way. So Ms. is fine, and do not go into the whole Miss or Mrs. on your resume. Often people even leave out the title in general, because now in our gender conscious world, some people do not wish to be called either Mr. or Ms. They think that they're not identifying with one gender or another, which is another reason in our previous seminar, there were a lot of people who had learned, I think at school, why you should not send a professional email and address it dear sir or madam. And if you do a simple Google search, why not dear sir or madam, there's many hours of reading material explaining why not, and why that is a very old and not useful approach. But the fact is, as with these gender terms, some people don't want to necessarily identify with either sirs or with madams, and they just want to be themselves, which is their right in the world today. So all of this Mr., Mrs., Ms., it becomes a rather personal argument But the way to avoid it is if you're a woman, write Ms. MS dot and not Miss and not Mrs. Even if you're married and you're proud of being married, there's no reason to put that on a resume. Okay. The first thing in the resume that they want to know, and again, this I've seen a lot of times in Thai student resumes, all sorts of things are at the top, but not the work experience. And if you're applying for a job, the first thing they want to know is, well, where have they worked? What is their professional experience? So if you're applying for a job with a resume, please put your work experience at the very top, whatever that might be, even if it's rather modest, because if you're a student and you work part-time or you perhaps had your first job only recently, put that as to show that you are part of the working community. It's encouraging for the people who read your resume, and they will see that you're a serious, work-minded person, and that you care about working. And then you put your most recent job first, then the one that was next to the most recent, and so on your resume. And any list, put the most recent thing first, because again, I've seen sometimes people go in chronological order, starting with earliest, and no, they don't want the earliest, they want the top and most recent. Now, one of the things I think to keep in mind is, in general, nobody cares about what you did in high school. So if you are just a freshman at university, for example, and you're only 18, well, you don't have much history apart from what you did in high school. So your resume would have that information. But the moment after a couple of years of university, and perhaps you worked part-time or you've done internships, you can put aside your high school and put that in the background, because basically a resume is, what is your record of adult activity or your adult professional work or profession, or your adult study when you're 18 and above. And that is what they want to see, where you're responsible, where you have leadership qualities, and where you have workplace skills. Now, if you remember in the sample, the template that we looked at before, there was a little space at the very beginning for people to write, for example, goal, to find a challenging, inspiring job in a fast-moving field, and whatever your field is. Because you were telling them at the very, very beginning of your resume what the purpose is of this resume, what I am trying to find, what I am looking for. I'm looking for a challenging, inspiring job in a fast-moving means, even if there's a lot of work, I won't start to cry and run around and go home. I don't mind if there's a lot of challenging work to do. And that's the sort of person they want to hire, someone who doesn't panic if there's a lot of work to do, because usually, certainly in the employment field, in jobs, the person who has arrived the most recently, who has been hired the most recently, gets a whole lot of work that other people can't do or don't want to do or have not been able to finish. And so they kind of dump it on the latest person, and that person does have a lot of work to do in any employment. It's a sort of tradition. And in, of course, studies, you also want to say you're looking for challenging, inspiring studies in a fast-moving field of research. In other words, you want all the new ideas, you're thrilled because of the nuclear physics or chemistry or whatever the subject is you're thinking of studying at a higher level of education. You want to tell them you really are interested with challenging subjects and difficult projects, and you want to be able to show your abilities. So this is why you would say at the very beginning to mention how eager you are to study at the university or to work at a job. especially when you apply for a job, well, really only when you apply for a job, because that's where it sometimes happens, try not to mention money too much, because if you put in that your main goal is to make money, even though, of course, in business, the main goal is to make money, and most people, in fact, want to make money, it's not necessary to talk about it, at least at the resume level. At some point, if they hire you, then you will talk money, because they will tell you what the salary, or you will tell them what salary was, the salary of your previous job, and what salary range you were looking for, and all sorts in the negotiations. But in the resume, you really are expected to talk about the wonderfulness of the job, and the challenge, and the excitement, and the interest, and why you're motivated by the actual job itself and what is expected of you in the job, not the fact that you might make money, because that is not the main concern to them, the people who are considering whether to hire you or not. They don't care too much whether you become rich or stay poor. They are just looking for a good worker, someone who would fit in with the office and other issues, other criteria. But so for them, it is not so interesting to learn that you want to make money. So in general, it's better to stay away and say that you're looking for challenges, things that have to do with the job description, because you're often responding to an advertisement or something that will tell you something about the job, sometimes a fairly vague description, but as long as your interests seem to correspond with the way the job was described, then you have a better chance of pleasing the people who say, oh, yes, this person's resume seems to fit what we're looking for, because they're looking for a challenging, fast-paced, demanding job, and we in our ad put that it's a challenging, fast-paced, and demanding. It's that sort of thing. You want to correspond with them. Now, after you've listed your job history, you put your educational experience, and then the most recent degree at the top, and then earlier degrees. But again, as mentioned, you don't have to go all the way back in your educational to when you were a child, because basically they are looking for your mature studies and mature work experience. Now, people who have long work history sometimes don't want to mention a job, or for whatever reason, they didn't like it or whatever it was. So you don't have to put in a lot of detail about a job perhaps that you didn't enjoy. Better to focus on ones that you did enjoy, because if in an interview, because often you have a job interview sometimes by Zoom or even sometimes in person these days, they may ask you, they're looking at your resume and they say, oh, you worked at so-and-so, what was that like, or how did that go? And then you can tell them, oh, that was wonderful. Always better to be positive, as opposed to saying, oh, I didn't like that, or it wasn't very nice. Always better to be positive if you can than negative. Now, the business of, if there's room at the bottom, usually at the end of the resume, for some sort of personal activities, hobbies, leisure activities, there's some heading there that, like, what you like to do on your own. And the reason, and it depends, again, in international resumes, international job interviews, sometimes the person interviewing you may look at that first, because they'll assume, oh, they have a degree, they have a bachelor's degree, they did that, they worked here at a bank or whatever it is. And then they say, oh, you like to go windsurfing or whatever it is that you do. And that can be the subject of conversation, which can be a way of talking in a more friendly or perhaps a more relaxed way than about strictly business issues or even strict academic issues. If you have another interest, which is not sort of working against somehow what you're doing professionally or your studies, but it shows that you are a sort of a broad-minded person with different things that fascinate you and excite you, then that can be a very good thing for your resume, to include more about yourself as a person. And it could be just a couple of words, really, of things that you like to do or things that you spend time doing. We'll move on. And again, when you're talking about your interests or your hobbies or your leisure activities, try to be specific. Rather than saying just food, or cooking, you could say, oh, I collect the most expensive durian fruit, and something that is very specific and shows that you have a specific interest. That will be a sort of conversation starter with the person who will be reading your resume and perhaps be interviewing you at some point. Because, of course, as you know, with university programs as well, there are interviews, and there must be some verbal exchange with the person who represents the institution, whether it's a job or whether it's a university. So they want to see what kind of human being you are to a certain extent, and in as much as possible, when it's just a question of your life is put on one page. I mean, when different candidates, either for a university, a place at a university to study, or at a job, people have been, mostly to the same university, have had mostly the same experiences. So what makes people different is sometimes what their hobbies are or their leisure activities are. If you wish to put in references, you can either say references available on request, but it's not even necessary for that, frankly, because if they want references, they may ask for them, and then you can just send them separately if you need references. But they should be on a separate page, not on your resume, because you don't have room on your resume for references. And for international resumes, you don't put your date of birth, unlike Typestyle, where often people put their date of birth. Because in universities, and especially in companies now internationally, there's such a thing as age discrimination. You're not supposed to care how old or young someone is. I mean, if they're only 8 years old, if it's a little kid, you may not want to hire them to be a nuclear physicist yet. But in other words, the age is not supposed to play a role in whether people are chosen or kept on in jobs. So better not to take too much of an interest in ages. And therefore, when you make your resume, you're not really supposed to put in a birth date anymore, although you might have a birth year and date in your Thai resume. For your international resume, not necessary. And by the way, I've even seen in Thai resumes religion. Now, it's always nice to be proud of your religion and to be involved and to make it part of your life. But the people who are hiring you for an international job and the people who are accepting you or not in an international university program are absolutely not interested in your religion. They will not discuss your religion. So again, if you have that on your Thai resume, religion, Buddhist, or whatever it is, you don't want to put that in your international resume. It's considered a private matter, not a professional qualification. Now, you may be applying to an institute for Buddhist studies and be doing higher research in Buddhism. But even then, I would be surprised if an international program would want you to put religion Buddhist. In fact, they might be more interested in an applicant or a candidate who was not Buddhist, but who was fascinated in studying Buddhism. So better not to put religion Buddhist at all. And I've seen that on Thai resumes. Now, little friendly advice. Be honest. It seems like it shouldn't be necessary to say that, but the fact is that in job contracts internationally and at universities as well, certainly for university jobs, for being hired at universities, but even for applying to graduate programs, if somehow people do not say the entire truth and then it is found out, they can just say, oh, well, sorry, but when you were accepted or when you were hired, we thought this and that, and because your resume said this and that, but in fact, you didn't go to Harvard University, you went to, some other, and so if they find that out, you're in trouble, because they can just decide, all right, your acceptance is no longer valid, your being hired is no longer valid. And then that's a sad thing, because whatever you do, you can't go back and say, oh, but I really meant, but, too late. So try to be very accurate in your resume, not invent things, not make up things. Only because it can be unpleasant if they find out that you've invented or made up something, or even got something wrong, and it somehow makes you look better, or they might have said, oh, well, we hired you or we accepted you because this was in your resume, and then it turns out that it's not true. So avoid that whole drama by being honest. It's quite simple. As people say, it's much easier to remember if you tell the truth, because if you tell a lie, you have to think about it all the time. So just tell the truth, and your life will be much easier. Now, I guess, well, actually, before we go to some samples, what other, I think we can go to some samples. That way we'll have some time for questions and answers, because now we're at about the 1 hour part, right? Quickly, if you look at sample resumes, you Google search sample resumes, look for samples which have a university URL like edu, because again, it's not a company trying to make money from you. It's a university trying to help their students get into graduate programs, find a job, career guidance, edu. edu. Harvard, edu. These are all resume samples. And so I've opened quite a few of them just to give you an idea. And quite a few of these are very specific. So, no, that wasn't it. All right. This one is one of those edu resumes. Now, again, the person who loves color and who loves different cute fonts and all sorts of design elements and cats and whatever else you might like when you make a resume, you notice this one is very plain, is very simple, black on white, no decoration at all. You might say, how boring, if you love the visual sort of excitement. However, this is considered an ideal resume. So think about that. In the international academic and business world, this very plain resume is considered great. So think about it. When you're tempted to put in pink and red and gold and green, and just black on white is all you need. Sometimes you could think, okay, it's too easy. I want to show that I'm doing more than what is required. just take it easy and do what is asked to do. Sort of, in other words, what is expected can be at the same time easier because you have to do a whole lot less and actually please the people who you're trying to please the most, because you do just what is requested, and that's it. It takes much less time than if you start to design a whole resume with decorations and ornaments and things. You just do a simple, plain, boring resume. Maybe if you, for yourself, you might wish to do a really exciting, fun resume. But for most usages of a resume for a job or higher education, it can be very, very simple and also can work very, very well. So here we are, Mr. John Smith, address. Now he put a university email address, perhaps that's his only email. Normally you would also want to put a private email address, which just means Hotmail, Yahoo, Google, Gmail, whatever your email address is. Career summary. I would also just add quickly that sometimes from emails that I've seen in Thai students, if you put in Roman letters, first of all, but also just have an email account where it's just your name. You know, you don't necessarily want a fun email address. I like to party or whatever it is at hotmail.com. You just want your name. In this case, it's John W. Smith, so it's J.W. Smith. And that's the best, because that way they can, it helps them to remember your name. And if you're sending this to an international university or an international employer, already the fact that your name, unless they really are very familiar with Thai people and Thai tradition and Thai language and Thai names, the Thai name may be difficult for them or may be unfamiliar. So the more you make it clear what your name is, the easier it is for your potential employer or your potential university department. So that helps them a lot, and they will appreciate that. So here, summary, adult care. Clearly, this is someone who's working with adult care, with child care, okay. You notice the bullet points here, employment history, okay. Education after employment. You notice that first, career, employment, education, and then that's it. So his resume is actually rather limited, doesn't tell us much about him apart from the fact that he likes to take care of children and adults and that he's worked in education. Now, let's see. And then we move on to some others. Now, I'm not going to go through all of these because obviously there's too many, but if you look at enough of them, and I mean just look, spend a few seconds even looking at these different resumes, you'll be sent the PDF, so you'll have access, or you can do your own internet search and just look at a whole lot of different resumes, the ones that are particularly presented by universities, as mentioned, that have the EDU URL. And you will look and see the way that it's shaped around the page, the address, education. Well, in this case, this is an education resume, not looking for employment, I think. But and at the bottom, there is room for activities. All right. Now let's see, resume samples. And so the more resumes you look at, the more ideas you could have. There's some specific resumes here, very kind of pinpointed use of the resume. Let's see if I can find some. This is a senior urban studies major seeking full-time job. So it's someone who has studied urban studies and is looking now for work. He's graduated, presumably. So here he is, Julio Cortez, his address, his phone, his email, his LinkedIn page, or you could put a Facebook page, as long as it, again, when you're applying and you're sending out your resume, watch out for your Facebook page. You don't want to have Facebook page with too many fun images of drinking alcohol or doing other things, because employers look at your Facebook page, they really do, and they're not happy to see you having too many parties. So employers are like that sometimes. So if you're going to put in your Facebook page in your resume, but even if you don't, international employers will do the research and look up your Facebook page if they can. And so you might want to just check that your Facebook page is very polite and proper and nice and not too wild if you're going to be applying for jobs or for university acceptance. You really want to be very conservative in that sense. So here Julio Cortez has his education first, coursework, skills, experience, research assistant, intern, and basically he's worked in internships or part-time and things like that, and is now ready to work more seriously. And this type of formatting, which looks a little complicated, again, if you go back to the templates and fill in the different formatting, it's actually done for you. So you would not have to sort of space things out and put in different sort of things the way they are here. It could be much easier than that. Here's just to give you another example. Let's see. Senior history major with leadership and some human resource experience, seeking a human resource role. So again, everyone has their own little story, what they've done in the past, what they're looking for in the future. And when you think about it, a resume in a way is a kind of explanation of your life, but it's also what you would like to do. Because, for example, if you have to sum up your life in one page, you want to say, well, how did I spend that time? You know, if I had a few months off, did I just sit around the house and watch my series and sometimes meet my friends for Swenson's or for some other Krispy Kreme or something? Or did I volunteer to read for the blind? Did I help to teach deaf children at a school? Did I do other social and activities that somehow helped people around me? Because as you know, there's many people in Thailand who need help. They're in poverty, they're in poor health, they need assistance, and volunteering is very useful, but it also looks very good on the resume. That's the famous expression, that looks good on the resume. And however young you are, and in fact, the younger you are, the more impressive it is if you show an interest in the people around you, people who maybe you don't know. If you're not just out, you know, to sort of amuse yourself and have fun 7 days out of 7, but if you find a couple of hours out of the week or out of the month to volunteer, and you can put that at the bottom of your, or somewhere in your leadership experience or in some other part of your resume, a resume can be an occasion for you to inspire yourself. Maybe things that you would not ordinarily have done, you will do because they look good on the resume. And don't worry, just because you're doing it because it looks good on the resume, if you do those type of volunteer things enough, you will be a good person and a good volunteer. As they say, if you act in a good way long enough, you become a good person. It really is not a mystery. And And if you, some people will say, oh, that's not my style. I'm not the volunteer type. I don't particularly feel comfortable doing that, which, may be the case, but there's probably something you could do to help your fellow Thai person, or even foreign person, which I should say not Farang, but someone who's not a Thai citizen. There's lots of people who are in Thailand who are suffering and need help. And there's so many ways. I don't have to tell you how to Google in Thai language, volunteering opportunities, volunteer social work opportunities, volunteer, all sorts of different fields where you can volunteer. And it will help other people, and it will look good on the resume. Because again, imagine 500 different resumes, and this person in an office is looking at them all. And then they say, oh, this person graduated, but also found time to help the people around them, that they care, is someone who really is committed to making a better world. How nice. It's a good impression. It makes a good image. So even if you feel it's not your favorite thing to do, to go and be an assisted healthcare person, or helping blind children, or doing anything that could be seen as a nice, generous, helpful, charitable thing to do, just imagine how good you will look for the people then who have to decide whether they want you around them or not in their university program or in an employment situation. Because many large international corporations have a much greater charitable investment than Thai corporations do, and certainly than many Asian corporations. In China, there's no tradition at all of what they call corporate philanthropy. The companies just make the money and keep it. But in most other countries, there's a really strong tradition, and even there are departments founded for specifically investing money in different charitable organizations that then help around the world. And in fact, many of these international corporations give money to Thailand and give money to orphanages and give money to other Thai activities that where resources are needed. So the fact is, if you are thinking of entering a job with a major corporation which has an international presence, if you start early by showing that you're interested in charitable activities, you will show the company that really you have in mind the sort of company they are. Naturally, you will have, and I think this is a basic bit of advice that you probably already know, but you might not always think about, whether you're applying to a university or to a corporation for a job, look at the websites. That's what they're there for. And the texts that they have on the websites about the kind of university they are, the kind of research they're doing, the sort of programs they have, that is exactly the type of thing they would like you to correspond to. So the more you can seem like their ideal candidate, their ideal student, the person who would really be the most excited and productive in their program, according to what they do, then the likelier it is that you will be accepted, because they see you as fitting in to their program. So look, take the time. It might only be a minute or 2 minutes perhaps to read some of the texts that these universities put on their websites for international student applications and what they offer. But when you're doing your resume and also any other accompanying statements, see how that corresponds to the sort of the person you are presenting and when you present yourself. And the same is true of corporations or employers that you send a resume to. Look up their website, see how they describe themselves and what they are looking for in terms of their own corporate goals, and see how your own professional dreams correspond with what this company represents and stands for. And you can say, I did this charitable work and I very much admire the fact that this corporation does all of this good work around the world and helps many underprivileged children and other activities that I find admirable. See, and you could say how you feel close to this corporation because it does so much good in the world. The company will love you if you're an applicant and you say that, you see. And if you can say it sincerely because you have worked in charity and you do admire the company's work. I mean, that's a major point. You're not just saying, I want this job because I want to make this much money. And, you know, that, okay, well, that's nice, you know, but why should we hire you? Well, we hire you because, oh, this is a person who really cares about all our corporate activities and who has done on their own, has done charitable work and might want to participate in our corporate projects and maybe even work in that division eventually. They can see where you would fit in, where they would place you, and they want to see you in their larger context. So if you can give them that type of information that shows you're thinking along the same lines as their corporation or their university research department, then you can absolutely have a successful resume that will appeal to many, many different kinds of potential employers or institutes of higher learning. Well, we won't go, it's already, well, it's almost 10:50. Kunjun, do we have some questions or how are we doing with questions?
And so there are 3 questions
Okay,
right now.
okay.
Would you like to continue your presentation?
No, let's start. Let's do the question.
Okay. One moment. So the first one, I would like to know what makes a resume look unprofessional so it could be avoided doing in the future.
Sorry, what is that? You want to know what makes a resume look
Unprofessional.
Unprofessional, bad resumes. Okay. All right. To be avoided. Well, all right. So here we are doing Google examples of bad resumes. The worst resumes of 2022. All right, the worst resumes. The bad speller. Well, I'm not sure it's worth going negative, shall we say, and giving examples of what not to do, but I mean, spell check obviously is very important. You're using a Word document, so clearly you will have the benefit of spell check. And as I mentioned, Google search all the terms. So in terms of bad spelling, you don't want to spell anything, any important word wrong. So just check them all with Google search and with your spell check on the Word document. Bad spelling and grammar are one of the quickest ways to get your resume thrown away. Okay, well, you know. Well, you know, let's see. Oh, I see. They spelled, this actually is not that bad, but oh, I see, peak service. Instead of a steakhouse, these people have spelled the word steak-hose, H-O-S-E, instead of steakhouse, H-O-U-S-E. So it's a little bit like the people who say, I want to, please accept me in your graduate program. And by the way, I studied for 4 years at Thammasat University. Well, if people are being very critical, they might say, oh, this person studied at Thammasat for 4 years, but they never learned how to spell it, which is a little mean. Well, especially for, a non-native speaker of English, although this person seems to be from Texas in this resume. And as you might soon find, if you ever work in, America or England or Australia, even native speakers of English can have terrible English sometimes. So spelling things wrong is not just for people who are not native speakers. It happens to everybody, particularly those who think that they know it all. Now, I think as long as we remain modest and double check everything, I think everything should be fine. The problem was, as if you remember at the very beginning of the presentation when I discussed the English Proficiency Index, let me just give you 2 more minutes about that, because I think a lot of this has to do with your attitude, avoiding mistakes and getting things right and not doing the bad things. A lot of it really has to do with your point of view and how you see yourself. Because if you see, for example, that it is a national problem with English in Thailand, and that it's not just your personal problem, but it really is almost everyone. There are brilliant, really brilliant researchers and people who are great thinkers and famous Ajahns, who have done wonderful things and won awards for their research, but who still have problems with English. It is an almost universal issue. So what does that mean? It means that it becomes a somewhat of a psychological trauma here. And people who are otherwise very high achievers and very accomplished must somehow face the fact that the memory of their English studies was maybe their only failure in academics, or one of their only failures. And so for them, it is an embarrassment, it is a humiliation, it might be an unhappy memory of boredom and hostility, all these things associated, what I sometimes call the Freudian trauma of English for people who have suffered with English, even though they're very talented and intelligent and gifted with other things. So what should they do to avoid, as you ask, avoid making mistakes with resumes? Well, as I think I've tried to say, the reaction to that and the way to deal with that Freudian trauma is to be modest and to accept that there is a national problem with it, not just a personal problem. Don't blame yourself or think that you are somehow at fault, but realize that this issue exists and use a friendly helper like Google search and spell check just to make sure that things look the way they should. The key point is, if you become a successful student or even have a job where you're some level of responsibility, don't think just because that happened, your English is perfect and you don't have to worry about it. That would be a big mistake. That would be a mistake, because then you don't do spell check and you don't do the Google search for the terms, and you just sort of think, oh, well, I've done this and that, and my English must be perfect, therefore I'm not going to bother double checking. That is where the problems start. And that is where we start spelling things in a way that we should not. So as long as we stay modest and remember that this is a very widespread problem in the kingdom, then we will keep doing each time the little checks that we need to do so that the result looks wonderful and is impressive in our resume. If we ever start to think, oh no, I got a very good grades, my English is good, that's usually a danger point. Whether or not you've actually mainly studied English, many of the people who think they have wonderful English are not even English students. They're not even people who've studied English in a serious way. They probably studied some other subject, sometimes even in an English-speaking country. I've seen some people who have maybe spent a few years getting a MA or PhD in an English-speaking country in a different subject, not English, but in some other field of study. And they come back and they say, well, I spent those years in England. I must have perfect English now. Big mistake, because they're still a non-native speaker and writer of English. So they have to remain modest. They should. Sensible people generally, or sensitive people, are aware of the limitations, and they're aware that something can happen. And if you're not, it's better to double check just to be sure than to just assume that everything is fine with the language. But if we're conscious and we're aware that these English issues can come up, and we use Google search and we use spell check for Microsoft Word, then we can eliminate a whole lot of these mistakes that you're interested in. The amateur graphic designer, now this is the other subject I was talking about, which is to say, unless you are a professional graphic designer and artist, better not put in the funny stuff in your resume. It just doesn't really work. If not, here's someone who put money in their resume. And I think of a student presentation I once saw, a very complicated issue of finance and related subjects. And then at the end, they put in images of money. And I said to the student, but everybody in the conference knows what money looks like. And they said, yes, but we wanted to be more decorative. We want to be decorating our PowerPoints. Well, okay, but if you put money in your resume, not a good look, so don't put what they call the distracting graphics. Graphics in your resume are never a good idea. Distracting, because instead of looking at all the wonderful things you've done and who you are, they're looking at the pictures. The people who are evaluating your resume and deciding whether to include you in terms of being hired or accepted to the university program. So don't distract them. Keep their minds focused on what you absolutely have to tell them about yourself. Flashy graphics. Flashy is not a nice term. So, passive achievements instead of active achievements. Well, that's a little more philosophical, but you should, I think they're just saying whatever you did, you have to sound like you really have leadership and that you did it, and it's something like that. Don't use strange fonts. Now, remember, and I was talking about what looks clear and just give the information in very boring, plain. Times New Roman is a very common font. Times New Roman for international English or Roman letters. And this type of font is a little too perhaps informal, not formal enough. It looks almost like handwriting. So you don't want a resume that looks like that. For example, you want a resume that looks rather boring and straight. Avoid handwritten style fonts on your resume. If anything, the actual, and this is the irony, is that the person here who they're writing about, they have good credentials, they have good professional experience, but people will have difficulty actually reading it because it looks so strange as a font. And it's not professional, unprofessional, hard to read. So again, if you're tempted, don't be tempted. Just go for the very plain, straightforward, clear presentation. and then your own credentials, your own qualities will become much more clear. In a way, you're almost hiding yourself if you use a presentation that's a little too eccentric. And here we are, they even tell you bad fonts, that you don't want to say. Good fonts, Times New Roman, as I just mentioned. Times New Roman is considered, for clarity of reading, is ideal. And in fact, if you do a research article for an academic research paper, or even a thesis at many international universities, you will be asked to format your thesis or your academic research paper in Times New Roman font, usually 12 point. And then they have alternatives if for whatever reason you absolutely hate Times New Roman font and you don't want to have your resume in Times New Roman font, you refuse. So you have some alternatives if you wish. Yeah, well, this one, here they're saying don't put on your resume too much about your video games, because even if you spend most of your life playing video games, your employer, and especially the university that might want to accept you, probably doesn't want to know about it, unless, again, if you're applying for a job as a video game creator, then obviously, yes, that is very relevant to your employment future. Now, I'm the last person to criticize anyone who spends all the time playing video games, because people who create video games can make a lot of money from creating video games. It's an excellent job if you do it well and people recognize and appreciate your video games. So I think it's wonderful if people can make a living playing video games. So I think, great. But if you're applying for a PhD in comparative religion or something that has nothing to do really with video games, or at least nothing obvious to do with video games, it might not be good to stress all of the video game experience, unless, again, you could say, I developed a video game about the life of the Buddha, or, whatever you could say that somehow ties in your hobby of video games and your own more serious academic goals, or perhaps your professional goals. You wish to work in the company and you want to work for the corporation, but you wish to use your video game experience to target ideal customers for the corporation who are very influenced by the video game world, or whatever explanation you wish to give. So you can use hobbies or leisure activities like video games in a resume, but not list them as your full and only accomplishments. And I think that's the mistake of this particular resume. The autobiographer, someone who writes long a book, the autobiographer this is sort of like a joke or an insult. You've written a whole autobiography or a memoir. Nobody cares about you that much. Or even if they did, they don't have the time to care about you. So page and page and page and page. No, give them a 1 page, And again, the main thing is being brief, however difficult that is, because often being brief is more difficult than going on at great length, because you have to decide what is the most important and you have to put it all into a small space. But when you are brief, you are in fact more respectful of the person who will be reading your resume, and you're more polite to the person who will be reading your resume, and that person will appreciate you. They will say, oh, what a nice professional resume. It told me immediately what I needed to know. I was able to evaluate it quickly. It is clear, it is concise. That person is the type of person we need in our corporation. Or maybe even that is the sort of person we would like in our university department. We want someone who's clear and organized and easy to understand. We don't want someone, what? we can't read this. It's too long. It has strange pictures. What's going on? They don't want the confusion. Their lives are difficult enough, the people who have to read your resume and the resume of 499 other applicants. So again, think of them. Think of the person actually who has to look at your resume. And I think that's one way to keep things very simple, clear, and not making a lot of these somewhat wild mistakes. I mean, it's possible that people make these mistakes all the time, but I think you will be less tempted to make these mistakes if you remember to just follow the template, keep things simple, keep things plain, make it very direct. And a lot of the stranger mistakes will not be made, you know. This resume is too long. And here, if you have less than 10 years of relevant work experience, just do a one-page resume. If you're really old, you've been working for a long time, you could do more, you know, but I think most of the people who are applying to this type of, you know, certainly to higher studies and graduate programs and to entry-level jobs or beginning jobs, one page is probably enough. Oh yes, well, a resume for whatever reason you're doing it, and a resume is, you know, either for university or for employment, is still considered sort of a formal document. So it needs formal English to a certain extent. I mean, it has to be polite. And so a resume should not have slang like hit me up, which is a way of saying call me, you hit me up. It's a sort of a silly way of saying call me. It's even a slightly offensive. I don't know why. I mean, it's just a ridiculous term. It hit me as a way of calling you. So I think it uses too many buzzwords, in this case, slang words. It means slang terms or words that are attempting to be very current and try to be like the latest slang. Don't bother. Just use standard English. Be plain, you know. And so terms like hungry for success, self-starter, which usually means, well, I don't need anyone to tell me what to do. I do it all by myself and that type of thing. And human resource managers see this as pretentious, people who are being fake, people who are being not the way they really are. And it doesn't tell us what we want to know about the candidate's experience and skills. And formatting problems. And so it goes on. These are all issues where, exaggerator, someone lying or saying something that wasn't quite true. And there we are, you know, good and bad resumes. Good resume, easy to read, no mistakes, skills and experience. Bad resume, difficult to read, spelling and grammar mistakes, you know, and I think it's all fairly clear that these are some of the more glaring issues. Some of these are exaggerated, I think, for comic effect, but in a way they also they're common errors. And again, if you just Google examples of bad resumes, you will find many different websites, commercial probably more than university websites, which will tell you, don't do this, don't do that, don't do this, don't do that. But I think rather than being negative, it's also, when you're composing a resume, it's good to think positive of what you should put in. That's the real point, and that was the focus of this presentation. Not so much don't do this. I think because too much negative can further make people anxious or worried about their English and all the rest. And I think it's not a good starting point to be negative when you're trying to hope to get into a academic program. You hope for a decent job. You know, I think these should be encouragements. Encouragements are necessary for these type of goals, and not so much don't do that. Anyway, next question. Yeah. Okay.
Next question. From your opinion, what do you think about designing your resume by adding skill level scales?
Now that's the echo is impossible. Wait, let me say that again. Continue designing your resume by what?
Adding skill level scales.
What is that? Say again.
Skill level scales. The scales.
Could you write that out? Because I just don't understand with the mask on what you're saying.
I think skill level scales.
Like you have a bar of your skill, like you know, bar give three star at your skill, and my English skill is 3 star like that.
Like you have the skills and then you put the bar, the scales at your skill, like in English, like good, intermediate, or like scales.
Or like a visual table or something like that. Skill level scales. Oh, sorry. Yeah, skill level scales. Okay. No, yeah, I think that they were right when they said it looks informal. I think that would have been really a little too decorative. And it looks a little bit like a game if you do that. It's better because again, a resume is a formal document. It's okay to write out what your skill levels are. Good, excellent, use words in English, good, excellent, outstanding, fluent in terms of language. That's how you should describe your skills. Skill level scale, yes. And not through any kind of diagram, I would say. And in fact, in resumes, I don't see the need for any diagrams. I can't think honestly of a resume which requires a diagram of any kind. I think you want a list of words, all of the resumes that we've looked at, basically. I'll go back to another one just to see. Here's another resume. You don't really see a diagram, do you? You just see a list in words, English language words, describing what the person's experience is and what they're looking for and the dates. No diagrams. So I would certainly, whoever advised you to avoid that type of diagram was probably correct. And I think that diagrams don't really have a place in resumes, particularly if we consider that the resume is just one page and very brief, or maybe 2 pages, if you're very experienced with your employment. And you don't have much room. So why would you fill up this limited space with a diagram, you know, when you can actually just spell out what your levels of skills are. And by the way, if you have a skill that you're not particularly proud of, if you just started to study Chinese language, but you really have just a beginning knowledge of it, maybe don't mention that. If you have to say Chinese, you know, not so good, or some level of skill which is less than good, you would not necessarily put that on a resume, because it would be like bragging about something you don't particularly do well. So I would keep in mind that the resume is showing you at your best while being honest, you're presenting your best side. You're presenting the best qualities that you have, and the best professional qualities and the best educational qualities. So you're talking about yourself in this way, and in a written out formal way, no diagrams. And that would be, I think, the best approach. Yeah. But I hope that answers your question. And anything else? Any other?
Yes. Is reference section needed to be put in a resume?
A reference section
Reference section.
in a resume. Now, what do they mean by reference section? Meaning like a list of publications or
I think this question is from Kun Sasi Wimon. Can you please explain more about reference section?
Oh, hi. I am Sasi Wimon ค่ะ and
One
for the
moment. One moment.
can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, sure.
Yeah.
So about reference section, I was wondering if like to put the name of the person that you want to claim.
your references, the people who will recommend you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Not necessary really, because it's supposed, I'll tell you why, because your resume is supposed to be about you. And while it's nice that people like you, 3, 5, however many references you have, it's not essential primary information. And again, you have very little space on a 1-page resume or even a 2-page where you want to talk about yourself and your activities. If they want to know about references, they will ask, especially if they're considering you seriously for the position. You know, then they will get to the point where they might request references, professional references. But, you know, it depends on the guide. It differs. There are different kinds of advice on different educational websites. Some say do not even put the line references available on request, because if you say references available on request, that takes up a line, and that should be obvious. Of course, your references are available on request. You don't have to tell them that. They should know that. If they need references, they will ask for references. And so, generally speaking, part of your very concise resume should not be all these references, unless when you look at the application instructions, either from the university or from the employer, they may tell you where they need the references. It may be in a separate entry, it may be wherever it is that they require the references, then you put them there. But on your standard already formed resume, no, I don't think that's not the best use of space. Quite often, since applications now are almost only online, in the application instructions, they will mention, by the way, what references do you have, and put them in this area. So the fact is, you are giving them your references online. You don't have to then add them again on your resume. There's no need. I mean, it's always very reassuring and gratifying to know that people think well of us and that we want to mention their names. Almost it brings good karma, you know, to mention people, adjarns or former employers or colleagues or whoever they are who actually think well, but not on the general resume, which really should be about your other activities, your educational achievements, your leadership work, your professional skills and achievements, a little bit about your personal leisure activities. And as I mentioned before, if you have volunteering, if you show that you care about society in general, wonderful always to include that in a resume. Much more important to show that you're a person with social awareness and that you care about your fellow people than to put references, I think, which are, I think, not of primary importance in a general resume. Yeah. I hope that answers your question. Yes, and let's see what else. Thank you.
For the next one, I was wondering if the
Yes,
volunteering
okay.
activity
No,
is
I can read.
Oh,
yes,
okay.
Oh, read it to the people. Go ahead. Sorry. Okay. Go
okay. So
ahead.
the question is, I was wondering if the volunteering activity that is by the most impactful for my experience is when I was in high school. Can I put it on the resume?
That's fine. You know, if that was the last time you did anything good for humanity when you were in high, by all means, I would mention it. Yes, always, of course. And by the way, let me say that I don't mean to, when I mention that most resumes tend to focus on adult activities or, you know, when people are a little older, of course, teenagers can do great things. Look at Greta Thunberg, the great environmental activists, and some of the great mathematician Évariste Galois did all his great mathematics before he was 18, and the great poet Rimbaud wrote all his great poems. He stopped when he was about 19. So obviously, young people can do absolutely amazing things, and yes, should be proud of them and mention them and continue on. I think there may be the question, oh, you were doing such wonderful youth leadership, and why did you stop? Why did you stop? Well, I got very busy, or there's always the excuse, well, I stopped doing volunteering because, but another solution might be, here I have to make a record of my life in a page or two. Maybe I should think about starting again, doing a little more volunteering. So I will have something good, more recent and good to mention on my resume. So it's wonderful. Yes, of course, if something that you're particularly proud of was done when you were in high school, absolutely mention it. But you might think also, well, maybe it's time that I got back to that wonderful example and did a little something else to help humanity. Since there are still plenty of suffering human beings around me on every street corner, and it might be time to get back to that, rather than just say that's something for high school students to do. I think the key point is that in a resume, because it is a reflection about where we have come from and where we hope to go, what we have done and where we would sort of like to see ourselves doing other things in future. So it's about your achievements and your record, but also about your hopes and your dreams. The challenge is to fit in a busy life schedule, adult life with studies and work and internship and other things, to fit in all the activities we would like to fit in to have a very well-rounded and productive existence. That is a challenge, but I think it's a challenge that universities and employers, especially big international corporate employers, expect the candidate, the applicant, the person who is applying for the job or for the university position, they expect us to have figured out or thought about, so that we can say, yes, I'm extremely busy with my undergraduate studies, but I somehow found time in the few weeks that I was free to do this volunteering work or to do that project or to help with this or that. So even though I am very occupied, fully occupied by my studies and part-time job and other responsibilities, I managed to somehow find a little bit of time to do this volunteer work or to do this other social project or to do something else. It almost is a question of imagination, of figuring out how to fit into an already very busy schedule. I mean, you don't want to make yourself sick. You don't want to exhaust yourself. If you're completely tired out just by doing what you have to do, then obviously it's not the right moment to do volunteer work or other extracurricular work. But if it can be figured out, it makes you look good. It makes you look more organized. And because after all, when you're at a university, and especially when you're at an international corporation, there's sometimes can be enormous amounts of pressure and work, and you have to somehow fit it all in to get things done as much as possible. Sometimes, you know, it is impossible, but sometimes it's a challenge. But the idea being, well, here's a challenge. How am I going to fit all of this into a work day of limited hours? How can I fit it all in? Well, fitting all the activities we would like to do, in addition to socially helpful activities, our studies or our professional responsibilities, that all becomes part of how you organize your day and your life. And that is what employers and universities like to see. How well organized is this person? How much have they managed to achieve in the same amount of time that someone else sent us a resume and they don't seem to have done all that much? So why does this person somehow find time in a very busy day to do a little bit extra, whereas the other person does not? And so when they have to choose between the two people, they will probably choose the person who they see as the most organized and the most able to do a lot of different stuff at once, what they call multitasking. Yeah, so if you've done something in high school, good for you, wonderful. And I mean, the nicest thing, and I don't know that program, but I would imagine that the student leadership program, like all high school things, is supposed to prepare people to be generous and giving in adulthood or as they get older. In other words, these programs for high school students are not supposed to be, oh, well, this is for you when you're very young, but we expect you to be entirely selfish once you get past the age of 18. Live only for yourself, you know, that type of thing. I'm not saying that's what you do. I'm saying, you know, I'm making a joke about how these programs look to the future and how they expect people to carry on in the same example or the same pattern of doing the type of charity work or leadership work or other benevolent activity throughout their lifetime. There's no reason to stop, really, because yes, people are busy, but of course, high school students are very busy with work too. And high school students also have to find time. They have a lot of social things going on, sports, whatever else they're doing, to find the time to actually be aware of the existence of someone else. And I think it's particularly challenging the younger the people are, because it's natural that younger people are more absorbed with their own problems and goals and ideas, and they're less likely to pay attention to what's happening maybe to the next person. So the fact is, if people managed to do that when they were in high school, then all the more reason for them to find a possibility of somehow doing a very little bit as they get older. And that would also validate the high school program, because it will show, oh yes, when I was in high school, I did this, and it was a volunteering, it was a leadership program, and it impressed me so much that I decided I'm going to try to find some time to do this, however busy I become in my future life. And so you sometimes find the CEO of a major corporation who will volunteer at a soup kitchen and give out food in the holiday or something like that. In other words, making a public gesture of awareness that other people are not as fortunate as we may be, And also understanding that each little bit helps, that if we try to improve the situation for other people around us, it is a good and useful activity. So it's wonderful to start that when you're young, when you're in your high school, but then how much nicer also to continue it in some way, however, whatever is possible. So that is also, in this way, resumes, by the way, can be an inspiring thing. Yes, it can be boring if you have to do it and it's a task and it's something they require of you and how dull, but it can also make us think, oh, how can I actually have a more productive life? How can I have a more rewarding life where I actually get more done and do more things that I'm proud of? And hey, wasn't that great when I did, you remember things from your past when I was in high school and I did the leadership program? Wow, maybe I should do something now, or, you know, now that I have a more mature outlook, maybe I could bring different things to the similar activities that are charitable. So in a way, the task of having the responsibility of having to do a resume inspires us to become better people in a way, because we can then think of doing things we might not necessarily have thought of doing. Oh, I'm past that all. That was nice when I was in high school, but now I have to do other responsibilities. Well, maybe we can also do both. Maybe it's possible that we will not forget entirely in the leadership and our past good actions. We will try to integrate them into our future and to our present. And so making a resume can teach us that there's always hope for doing the best that we can do. And it's a kind of ideal portrait of us, although
Okay, one moment. I think we have the connection problem. Please wait a moment.
Share screen. And share. Yes.
okay. So
The next question.
Okay, for the next question is which section would you suggest for a new graduate to focus on, like bringing up to the main section when they apply for the new job, but they don't have relevant experiences?
well, it really depends on the individual case. I think you can find that type of resume online in the different examples, that some of the ones that I've mentioned on the PDF. But if you're a new graduate and you absolutely have never worked at all, even in a little bit, because if you have worked at whatever job it is, it doesn't matter so much whether it's relevant and you're a new graduate. You could just mention the fact that you worked, which is better than if you haven't worked at all, because it at least shows that you're able to work in a standard job type of situation and that you're happy doing that. If you've never worked at all and you've just done studies, then the best thing, yes, to put up to the top instead of work would be leadership type of activities where you were doing studies or you were doing academics, but you somehow showed that you like to get things done and help others to realize what their goals are, and other type of activities like that within the school experience. So yes, I think that would be a perfect way to put that in if you have no work at all. But again, since you mentioned relevant work experience, I would say that better to put some kind of work experience where you're in an office or you're doing some work rather than nothing at all, just because even if it isn't relevant to the specific job you're applying to, it's good to show that you have some interest in the work, the whole work day and the work rhythm. Incidentally, I might add, when you apply to different things, whether it be a university or to a job, quite often it's a good idea to adjust your resume simply by stressing certain elements based on whatever it is you're applying to. In some cases, you want to make, obviously, if you're going into a university program or want to go to higher education, that type of subject matter is the thing that you'll stress in a academic resume, whereas if you want a job in an office, you want to show them that you're business-minded and that you're interested in that. But that I think is fairly obvious. You don't always send the same resume to everything or to everyone, but it depends on what the purpose of the resume is. And since the resume is short enough and you're using a template, it really does not take more than a few seconds to alter the resume and to fix it up so that it will look most appropriate for whoever you're applying to. Anything else?
Till now, there is no question. There are questions. There are any more questions?
No? Well, I wanted to show our favorite little image of the final. Thanks for your attention. And I wish everybody to get accepted in all of the academic programs and in all of the employment possibilities that you ever want. That is my wish to you in terms of resume use. So I hope it will be a less painful and maybe more enjoyable process of using resumes in future. Thank you for your attention.
Okay, so before we end the seminar, please do the satisfaction survey for us. May I share my screen?
And did we want to mention the next seminar on Wednesday?
Yeah, okay, of course. One moment. Here is our satisfaction survey. So if you have any comments or you have any recommend topics for the next time, you can fill in on the survey. And for the next seminar is about writing a personal statement to apply for a job internship or graduate program on 22nd of June. So it's next Tuesday, right? Okay. Next Wednesday. Okay, so if no questions, thank you so much for your time and for joining our English seminar today. So I hope this information will be useful for you. And thank you very much, Kun Benjamin, to be a good teacher for us. So we will use this information for when we're writing the resume. And if you have any questions about writing email or to write the English, you can contact Kun Benjamin by email that he provides to you at the first. Okay. Thank you so much. Have a nice day.